The shuttle doors hissed open, releasing a wave of heat and the thick scent of ozone. Lieutenant Ethan Cade stepped onto the sun-baked platform of Vorprime's military training complex, the heart of the Orion Legion. Towering barracks stretched across the horizon, their metallic surfaces gleaming under the twin suns. All around, recruits of various species stood in formation, hulking Bronth warriors, multi-limbed Dravaki, and a kite-armored Zalari. The moment they spotted him, a ripple of amusement passed through the crowd. "Is that the human?" A Zalari recruit, his carapace gleaming under the light, clicked his mandibles in amusement. "I thought they were smaller." A Bronth grunted, his voice a low rumble. Ethan ignored them. He had expected this. Humans were newcomers to the Interstellar Alliance, and the Legion's elite units had never accepted one before. He was the first. A sharp, grating voice cut through the murmurs. "Recruits, at attention!" Sergeant Zalvoth stepped forward, his imposing frame casting a long shadow. A Zalari veteran with dark green plating and piercing, multifaceted eyes, he carried himself with the authority of a soldier who had seen countless battles. He paced in front of the line, his gaze sweeping over them before settling on Ethan. "Lieutenant Cade," he said, the name tasting like an insult. "You were transferred from a human military unit, correct?" "Yes, sir." Ethan kept his voice even. "That's unfortunate." Zalvoth smirked. "You are standing among warriors bred for war. The Bronth crush enemies with their fists. The Dravaki scale walls and tear foes apart from above. The Zalari? We have fought since birth. And you?" He tilted his head. "What exactly makes humans worthy of being here?" Ethan met his gaze without flinching. "I guess you'll find out, sir." A few of the recruits chuckled. Zalvatha's mandibles twitched. "We shall." He turned to the others. "Form up! Today, we separate the strong from the weak." The recruits broke into formation. Ethan took his place among them, already feeling the weight of their stares. The training ground loomed ahead, a brutal course designed to break lesser soldiers. Walls twice his height. Trenches filled with electrified water. Gravity plates shifting randomly beneath the sand. Even for the stronger species, this was no casual warm-up. "Run it!" Zalvoth barked. The first Bronth launched forward like a freight train, smashing through obstacles with raw power. A Dravaki scuttled across the walls, bypassing half the course effortlessly. Ethan sprinted, keeping pace, but every step felt like a battle. The gravity plates kicked in, shifting from light to crushing weight in an instant. The Bronth powered through. The Dravaki adapted midair. Ethan's legs nearly buckled, but he gritted his teeth and adjusted his footing. Adapt. Adjust. Endure. By the time he reached the first wall, the Bronth recruits had already vaulted over with ease. Ethan leaped, caught the edge, and pulled himself up. His muscles burned, but he didn't hesitate. He hit the ground running, diving under a rotating set of metal bars that swung unpredictably. From the sidelines, Zalvoth watched, unimpressed. Ethan knew he wasn't the strongest, the fastest, or the most durable. He had to play this smart. While the others brute-forced their way forward, he used efficiency, conserving energy where he could, reading the course instead of fighting it. When he reached the trench, he saw the Dravaki leap across with their powerful legs. The Bronth? They simply stomped through, enduring the shock of the electrified water. Ethan didn't have the luxury of either approach. Instead, he timed the pulses, watching for the pattern in the current. When the electricity flickered off for half a second, he lunged, hitting the other side just before the charge returned. He landed on solid ground, breathing hard, but still moving. The course continued, rope climbs, impact drills, endurance sprints. The stronger recruits tore through it, but Ethan survived. By the time they reached the finish line, he wasn't first. He wasn't even in the top half. But he wasn't last. That, apparently, was enough to irritate Zalvoth. The sergeant stepped forward, his black eyes unreadable. "Adequate," he muttered. "But physical endurance is only one measure of a soldier." He gestured to a row of weapons lined up along the platform. Rifles, pulse cannons, plasma blades. And at the far end, a massive gravrail cannon. Ethan's stomach clenched. It was a monster of a weapon, nearly the size of his torso, designed for species that could lift tanks. He had seen them in combat vids, fired by Bronth and Zalari shock troops, each shot tearing through enemy armor. A human? No chance. Zalvoth motioned toward it. Pick it up. Silence. The recruits shifted, waiting for the inevitable humiliation. Ethan stared at the weapon. He knew what would happen if he failed. The smirks would turn into laughter, the skepticism into outright dismissal. He took a step forward. A Dravaki chuckled. This will be entertaining. Ethan crouched, wrapping his hands around the grip. He tested the weight first. It was worse than he thought. The internal mass displacement coils made it denser than any standard firearm. Dead weight in his hands? Zalvoth folded his arms. Well? Let's see what humanity is capable of. Ethan didn't waste strength on a reckless lift. Instead, he analyzed the balance point. He adjusted his stance, engaged his legs, and lifted, not with brute force, but with control. His muscles screamed, but the cannon moved. A flicker of surprise passed through the crowd. The smirks faded. Ethan's arms trembled, but he held it. A few seconds. A small victory, but undeniable. Zalvatha's eyes narrowed. He hadn't expected that. Ethan exhaled, lowering the weapon carefully before his muscles could give out. His arms burned, but he met Zalvatha's gaze with quiet defiance. For the first time, the sergeant didn't have a sarcastic remark. The recruits were still staring. Ethan could feel the shift. They didn't respect him yet, but they couldn't ignore him anymore. Zalvatha's mandibles clicked. Not bad, he admitted, though his tone was begrudging. Then his voice hardened. But don't celebrate. This was the easy part. He turned to the group. Tomorrow, we begin real training. And if the human survives that? A slow smirk spread across his face. Then we'll see if he truly belongs. Ethan let out a breath. He had won a battle, not the war. But that was fine. Because for the first time since stepping off that shuttle, he knew one thing for certain. They could mock him, doubt him, test him. But he wasn't leaving. Ethan's arms still ached from lifting the gravrail cannon, but he had no time to recover. The morning sun cast long shadows over the training yard as recruits gathered for the next test. Whispers passed between them, eyes darting toward him with new interest. He wasn't sure if it was curiosity or disbelief. Sergeant Zalvoth stood at the front, his mandibles twitching. He hadn't expected Ethan to last this long, and that alone seemed to irritate him. Today's focus is weapon proficiency, Zalvoth announced, his voice sharp. A warrior who cannot wield his tools is no warrior at all. A row of weapons had been set up along the armory racks: standard plasma rifles, precision carbines, Zalari energy blades, and heavy rail cannons. Ethan knew what was coming. Pair up. Choose a weapon. The recruits moved, each selecting something suited to their strengths. The Bronth grabbed massive plasma hammers, the Dravaki coiled their claws around long-range rifles, and the Zalari took their razor-thin energy blades. Ethan reached for a standard-issue pulse rifle, but Zalvatha's voice stopped him. No. You. Zalvoth gestured to the far end of the rack. Take the gravrail cannon. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Ethan kept his expression neutral. He had lifted it before, but using it in combat drills was something else entirely. He walked to the cannon, gripping the cold metal. It was absurdly heavy. Even shifting it into a firing stance was a struggle. The Bronth soldiers chuckled. This should be quick, one muttered. His assigned opponent, a towering Dravaki sniper, raised a sleek plasma rifle. She had the advantage in speed, precision, and stamina. Ethan had a weapon he could barely hold. Begin! Zalvoth barked. The Dravaki moved first, vanishing into a blur, taking a firing position behind a barricade. Ethan had seconds to act. His mind worked fast. Brute force wouldn't win this. The gravrail cannon wasn't just a weapon, it was a shock platform, a tool designed for high-impact suppression. Instead of trying to fire directly, he adjusted his grip and used the weight to his advantage. The moment the Dravaki aimed, Ethan dropped low, twisting his entire body as he slammed the cannon onto the ground. The sheer impact sent out a concussive shockwave. Dust and debris kicked up, blinding his opponent. She hesitated, only for a fraction of a second, but that was enough. Ethan didn't need to aim the cannon. He just needed a vector. He pivoted, straining every muscle, and fired. The rail shot blasted forward, missing by inches, but the aftershock was what mattered. The force struck the barricade, sending it crashing into the Dravaki. She barely rolled away in time, but Ethan had already repositioned. He abandoned trying to hold the cannon traditionally. Instead, he balanced it against his knee, anchoring his stance and absorbing the recoil through his body. He fired again, this time closer. The blast sent his opponent sprawling. Before she could recover, Zalvoth raised a hand. Enough. The training yard was silent. The Dravaki pushed herself up, rubbing her head. She wasn't injured, just stunned. She looked at Ethan, her mandibles clicking in what almost seemed like amusement. Clever, she admitted. Ethan let out a slow breath. His arms were on fire, but he had done it. He had fought differently, but effectively. Zalvatha's expression was unreadable. Not what I expected, he muttered. The other recruits were still watching him. Some with scorn. Others, with something closer to respect. But the day wasn't over yet. Next drill, Zalvath snapped. The recruits lined up again. This time, the challenge was endurance-based, a live combat exercise in the simulated battlefield. The instructors activated the hollow field, and the training yard transformed into a war-torn ruin, complete with artificial cover, shifting terrain, and automated turrets that fired stun rounds. Survive for 20 minutes, Zalvoth ordered. If you're hit, you're out. The recruits scattered. Ethan moved fast, diving behind a fallen pillar as the first turret locked onto movement. He wasn't as fast as the Dravaki or as tough as the Branth, but he had a different advantage. Humans were unpredictable. The others rushed forward aggressively, treating the exercise like a direct assault. Ethan read the battlefield. The Branth were too loud. Within minutes, 2 were taken out by sniper turrets. The Dravaki had agility, but they moved in patterns. Ethan noticed the turrets adjusting to them, predicting their leaps. He adapted. Instead of running in a straight line, he zigzagged, stopped, then moved again, breaking the AI's tracking algorithm. He stayed low, used debris for cover, and let the others take the brunt of the assault while he analyzed weaknesses. A Zalari recruit saw him crouched behind a pillar and smirked. Hiding human? Ethan didn't answer. He just waited. The Zalari rushed forward, exactly as he expected. At the last second, Ethan shifted left, baiting the turret's fire into the alien soldier instead. The Zalari barely dodged, but the distraction gave Ethan time to grab a fallen energy blade. Not ideal, but better than nothing. A Branth came next, charging toward him like a battering ram. Ethan didn't try to block. That would be suicide. Instead, he sidestepped and used the Branth's momentum against him, slashing low with the energy blade. The weapon only grazed his opponent, but it was enough to trip him into the line of fire. A stun round struck the Branth in the chest. Out. The tide shifted. More recruits were eliminated. At the 10-minute mark, only 4 remained. Ethan. The Dravaki sniper. A Branth brawler. And a Zalari duelist. Zalvoth watched closely, arms folded. He had expected Ethan to be eliminated in the first 5 minutes. Instead, the human had outlasted more than half the squad. But Zalvoth wasn't done testing him. He tapped a control panel. The battlefield changed. New obstacles rose from the ground. The terrain tilted, shifting gravity angles. Automated drones entered the field, firing more aggressively. Let's see how long you really last, the sergeant muttered. Ethan exhaled, gripping his blade. His body ached, his stamina was running low, But he wasn't backing down. The others moved. The battle wasn't over. It was just getting started. Ethan's heartbeat pounded in his ears as the battlefield shifted beneath him. The simulated combat zone had been hard enough, but now the ground itself was tilting, gravity warping at random intervals. Every step could send him stumbling into open fire if he wasn't careful. He couldn't afford a mistake. The remaining opponents, a Branth brawler, a Dravaki sniper, and a Zalari duelist, were still in the fight, each adjusting to the changing terrain in their own way. The Branth relied on brute strength, gripping the unsteady ground with clawed feet, charging through the chaos without concern for finesse. The Dravaki had already climbed to higher ground, scuttling across broken structures to find the best vantage point. The Zalari adapted effortlessly, their movements precise and efficient. Ethan was the odd one out. Weaker than the Branth. Slower than the Dravaki. Less experienced than the Zalari. But he had something they didn't. He learned. A moving battlefield. The Branth made the first move, barreling straight at Ethan like a juggernaut. A direct hit would end this instantly. Ethan saw the attack coming, but dodging was dangerous. The unstable ground meant one wrong step could send him tumbling. Instead of trying to outrun the Branth, Ethan used his surroundings. At the last second, he planted his foot against a tilting slab of debris and let himself fall with the shifting gravity. Instead of resisting the battlefield, he flowed with it. The Branth lunged, and missed, slamming into a collapsed structure. The impact sent shockwaves through the area. A shot rang out. The Dravaki had fired, taking advantage of the distraction. The plasma bolt seared through the air, missing Ethan by inches. He rolled behind cover, gripping the energy blade he had scavenged earlier. Against the sniper, closing the distance was his only option. But the terrain made it nearly impossible. The Dravaki had too many escape routes. Ethan exhaled. Think. Find the pattern. The Branth was recovering. The Zalari had yet to strike, watching. Waiting. And then Ethan saw it. The sniper was fast, but her positioning was predictable. She always retreated upward, using the battlefield's verticality. If she followed the same movement again, she'd land on the tallest remaining platform. Ethan took the risk. Instead of chasing her, he aimed for where she was about to be. The moment she leapt, Ethan threw his energy blade like a spear. It wasn't a perfect hit, but it didn't have to be. The weapon clipped her side midair, breaking her momentum. She crashed hard against the edge of the platform, her rifle skidding out of reach. Zalvatha's voice echoed across the field. Sniper, eliminated. Ethan let out a breath. One down. But there was no time to celebrate. The Zalari moved. The duelists danced. The Zalari warrior had been patient, but now that the battlefield had thinned, they struck with deadly precision. Ethan barely saw the blade coming. A flash of violet light, too fast to track. He twisted at the last second, feeling the heat of the energy edge pass inches from his ribs. The Zalari didn't stop. They flowed seamlessly from one attack to the next, relentless and calculated. Ethan blocked the first strike with his forearm guard. The impact sent a jolt through his bones. He barely dodged the second. The third? He didn't dodge at all. Instead, he stepped into it. The Zalari expected a retreat. They were used to opponents fearing them, backing away, giving ground. Ethan did the opposite. He moved inside their range, throwing them off balance. The duelist's fluid attack faltered for half a second. Half a second was enough. Ethan grabbed the wrist of the Zalari's sword hand and twisted hard. The alien hissed, jerking back, but he had already broken their rhythm. His counterattack was brutal. A strike to the knee joint. A shoulder slam. A calculated sweep that sent the Zalari crashing into the ground just as the gravity plates shifted again. They slid uncontrollably across the battlefield, straight into the path of an automated turret. A single stun shot hit their chest. Duelist eliminated. 2 down. Only the Branth remained. The final test. Ethan turned, already moving. The Branth was back on his feet, furious and ready. You got lucky. The massive alien snarled. That won't happen again. Ethan's hands were empty. The energy blade was gone. He had no weapons. But weapons weren't everything. The Bronth charged again. Instead of running, Ethan met him head-on. The crowd watching from the sidelines tensed. It was suicide, a human against a Bronth in melee? No contest. But Ethan wasn't fighting strength with strength. He ducked the first swing. Moved inside the Bronth's guard, just like he had with the Zalari. This time, instead of counterattacking, he did something unexpected. He grabbed the Bronth's wrist and shifted his weight, using the alien's own momentum against him. A judo technique. Something humans had perfected for centuries. The Bronth, already moving at full force, couldn't stop himself. His own size worked against him as Ethan redirected his energy straight into a shifting gravity plate. The battlefield tilted. The Bronth lost his footing. For a split second, he was weightless, just long enough for Ethan to plant his foot against the Bronth's chest and kick off. The impact sent the massive alien hurtling backward, right into the path of another turret. The stun round hit him square in the back. Silence. Then, Bronth eliminated. The battlefield flickered, then shut down. The simulation ended. Ethan stood catching his breath, surrounded by the stunned silence of the other recruits. He had survived. He had won. Recognition. Zalvoth approached. For the first time since training had begun, the Zalari sergeant looked at Ethan not with disdain, but with something else. Consideration. Impressive, he admitted. The word carried weight. The recruits still watching, the same ones who had laughed at Ethan when he first arrived, were no longer laughing. He had proven himself. Zalvatha's mandibles clicked. You fought smart. Used the field instead of letting it use you. A pause. A warrior does not need to be the strongest to win. They need to be the smartest. Ethan didn't need his approval. But hearing it? It felt damn good. Zalvoth turned back to the recruits. Tomorrow, training continues. Dismissed. Ethan exhaled. The battle was over, for now. But he knew the real war was just beginning. Ethan stepped off the simulated battlefield and into the harsh reality of the training barracks. His uniform was soaked in sweat, his muscles ached from the brutal exercise, but the silence from the other recruits was the real prize. A few days ago, they had laughed at him. Mocked the weak human, the outsider. Now, they watched him with a different kind of respect. He hadn't just survived the trial, he had won. Recognition and resentment. As he moved through the corridors, a familiar presence blocked his path. The Bronth. Still seething from his defeat. You got lucky. The massive alien rumbled, towering over him. Ethan kept his expression neutral. Luck had nothing to do with it. The Bronth's tusks flared in irritation. A low growl rumbled in his throat, but he didn't strike. Not here. You think this makes you one of us? The Bronth leaned in, voice laced with contempt. You're still weak. You don't belong. Ethan didn't react. He had learned something about the Bronth. They respected strength, but they feared control. And nothing was more infuriating than an opponent who refused to be rattled. We'll see, Ethan said simply, then stepped around him, leaving the Bronth standing there, fists clenched. A new challenge. Back at the barracks, Ethan barely had time to sit before a familiar figure approached. Zalvoth. The Zalari commander had rarely spoken to him before today. Now, the alien studied him with cold precision. Walk with me, Zalvoth said. Ethan followed without question. They left the barracks and entered a dimly lit corridor leading deeper into the facility. The farther they walked, the fewer recruits they passed, until they reached a heavily secured door. Zalvoth scanned his ID. The doors hissed open, revealing a strategic command room lined with hollow displays. Inside, a group of high-ranking officers stood waiting. All eyes turned to Ethan. A deep voice spoke first. So this is the human who upset the balance. Ethan looked up at the speaker, a Dravaki officer with dark, insectoid features. His tone wasn't hostile, But it wasn't welcoming either. You performed beyond expectations, another voice said. A Zalari this time. But skill in the arena does not mean skill on the battlefield. Ethan kept his stance steady. Something was happening. This wasn't about training anymore. Zalvoth stepped forward. We have a problem, he said. A display flickered to life. A planet highlighted in red. A border world on the edge of the Empire, Zalvoth explained. One of our garrisons has gone silent. No distress signals. No transmissions. Nothing. Ethan frowned. Pirates? Unlikely, another officer answered. No known factions operate in that sector. If this was a raid, there would be wreckage. Survivors. Evidence. There's nothing. Zalvoth studied Ethan closely. We are sending a reconnaissance team to investigate. And you are going with them. Silence. Ethan's mind raced. I thought I was still in training, he said carefully. You were, Zalvoth agreed. But that simulation proved something. You don't fight like a recruit. You adapt. You think. That is what we need on this mission. Ethan folded his arms. And if I say no? The Dravaki officer's mandibles clicked. Then you return to training. And missed a chance to prove you are more than a novelty. It wasn't much of a choice. Ethan knew this was his real test. The training was a game. This was war. When do we leave? Into the unknown. 12 hours later, Ethan sat aboard a military transport, strapped into a seat alongside a squad of hardened veterans. The atmosphere was tense. These weren't recruits. They were real soldiers, and they weren't sure what to make of him. A Zalari named Jara leaned over, eyes gleaming with curiosity. First mission? Ethan smirked. First real one. Jara nodded, satisfied. Good. Just don't get killed. The ship lurched as they dropped out of FTL. The planet loomed ahead, dark and silent. Ethan stared at it, a cold weight settling in his stomach. Something was wrong. The ship's scanners should have picked up cities, life signs, transmissions. Instead, the planet was dead. The comms crackled. No response from the outposts, the pilot reported. Sensors picking up something. Strange energy readings. Zalvoth's voice cut in. Proceed with caution. The transport descended. Through the viewport, Ethan saw the remains of a city, but no people. No signs of battle. Just emptiness. The ship touched down in the abandoned outpost. The squad deployed, weapons ready. Ethan stepped onto the surface. The air was thick with static. The silence was unnatural. Then, movement. Jara pointed toward the ruins. Shadows flickered between the buildings. Ethan's pulse quickened. The squad moved forward, scanning the area. Then the static deepened. A voice whispered through their comms, garbled, broken. Not distress signals. Not warnings. Something else. And then the shadows moved. Fast. Too fast. Ethan barely had time to react before something lunged from the darkness. The mission had begun. And they were not alone.